As a midwife, I would be saying, well, yes, maybe they gained a lot of weight, but what else we got here? How's the blood pressure? How's the pulse rate? How are they sleeping? Are they going to the bathroom on a regular basis? What are the other pieces of information that tell us the body's still handling all this and we're fine?
Welcome to the Birth Education Center podcast, hosted by myself, Care Messer, an entrepreneur, birth educator, and doula. My team and I want to help you discover your options in birth and postpartum, how to find your voice, and how to use that voice to navigate our maternal healthcare system. You and your baby are not just a number. This information includes doulas too. Now let's get started. I have Jenny West back today. Welcome, Jenny. We are talking about something that comes up in Ashley's and my classes all the time, which is weight gain. I have so many women come into class with histories of disordered eating, whatever that is, because there's a lot of different ways that can manifest. And they are paranoid about, if I gain too much weight, I'll get kicked out of the birth center. If I gain too much weight, my midwife XYZ. If I gain too much weight, they're worried about their health. They're worried about their baby being too big to fit because they're gaining so much weight, etc. And I want to know how we've birthed babies for the last, 2 millennia without the knowledge of we can't go over 25 pounds. And I want to understand how our bodies work, where this came from, so that we can just talk about it, because it's becoming more unhealthy as my students are coming in. And I'll give you a little peek into that. I've had very athletic women, rock climbers, CrossFitters, all of that, who gain quite a bit of weight while they're pregnant and get very paranoid and then stop eating. And the last trimester, because they are so afraid of the consequences, a big baby getting kicked out, whatever, like I mentioned, they're stopping eating. And some of that does spark if they've had disordered eating, or it is sparking disordered eating because of the pressure. Not healthy, not what we want, especially when babies are putting on that weight at the end and building their brain. So that's what I want to talk about today. So Jenny, where did that "you can only gain 25 pounds" come from?
So let's start with, where did this "you can only gain 25 pounds" come from that's still in play today? Because that was in play when my mom was carrying me many, many years ago. You're only supposed to gain 25 pounds. So somebody in school, I'm sure writing a paper or doing research to prep for some master level class, decided to figure out how much does the extra blood, the placenta, average weight baby, amniotic fluid, like all the things that made you pregnant. And then when you push the baby out, it's not there anymore. You're not pregnant anymore. That all weighs 25 pounds, which that's a piece of information. Okay. That may or may not apply if everybody in your family makes 10-pound babies. If everybody in your family struggles to make a 6-pound baby, which we might need to loop back to the sugar intake thing about making bigger babies or not.
So this didn't come from a study. This came from, we weighed all the ingredients that make a baby, including your amniotic fluid.
It might have been a study. Somebody had to collect enough information to figure out all those pieces and parts equals 25 pounds. Has nothing to do with what's actually going on while you're growing a baby and maintaining your own systems, because the baby will take off the top every time. And that list could be long. If you're not eating enough, if you're not drinking enough, if you're not eating enough salt, the baby's going to take whatever is coming in the body first. So whatever's left, and if you're dieting because you've already gained 21 pounds and you're now at 28 weeks along, which, by the way, beginning of the third trimester is about when the average pregnant person has gained between 20 to 25 pounds. So now to be restricting calories for the whole last trimester makes me want to strangle things, because that's so critical for the growth of the baby's brain, the synapses, the nerve endings, and the woman's health later in life. Because back to, if you're not eating enough, the baby still says, hey, I'm growing here. Feed me. I'm first. So guess what happens? The protein starts coming out of your bone marrow. The baby starts robbing from the pregnant body. You're not going to notice it until menopause, because the body's going to rise to the occasion. Growing this baby is the priority. We're going to do whatever it takes. If this person is only eating green beans, and it goes back to living in a cave, Neanderthal days. If you can't bring down whatever animals, a dinosaur or whatever was roaming the earth back then, you went without. So the body figured out a way to survive periods of no food and then periods of lots of food. The other thing that happens during pregnancy, and it happens during all the trimesters, but it's more obvious in the third trimester because the baby in the body knows that birthday is coming, is to start laying fat down on the backs of the arms, on the thighs, on the hips. This back to Neanderthal days. That is a safety margin of stored calories to make sure that you have enough calories to birth the baby and then feed it. Because breastfeeding takes 500 calories more a day to create breast milk to feed this baby. So wouldn't it be great if some bigger plan, bigger vision had stored fat ready to be utilized if for some reason 3 days go by and there's no food? Now, to put that in more recent terms, what if you had a surgical birth? What if you're not allowed to eat for a day or two during labor or right after labor? You're doing the biggest work of your life in labor, biggest calorie demand there ever was. And in our culture, you're not supposed to eat if you're in the medical model. Not that logical. But there's a backup plan, which is laying down fat layers in the third trimester.
Gosh, our bodies are so smart.
Yep. The more we can pay attention to what actually works without superimposing the textbook answer or what the medical model has decided is normal. And here's a sentence, here's a t-shirt. Just because it's typical doesn't mean it's normal. So there's been a lot of stuff superimposed for a variety of reasons that's just not that normal. So to be putting caloric intake and how much you weigh as a huge fear into a woman or a person who is growing a baby, that's just not nice, right? That's one piece of information. As a midwife, I would be saying, well, yes, maybe they gained a lot of weight, but what else we got here? How's the blood pressure? How's the pulse rate? How are they sleeping? Are they going to the bathroom on a regular basis? What are the other pieces of information that tell us the body's still handling all this and we're fine? We'll talk about diet in a second. Yeah.
Yeah, isn't that one of the biggest pieces of midwifery care? We're going to look at the whole puzzle, see what all the pieces say, and see if it's still falling within ranges of normal instead of, oh, you're over 25 pounds, not looking at anything else. That's
Right.
crazy to me, which is why we get such different care under the midwifery model of care.
A lot of the midwifery model of care integrates client education. Like it's almost impossible to get through a prenatal visit as a direct entry midwife without a little conversation about the reason I'm asking, how often are you eating, or how much protein are you eating, how much water are you drinking, and no, iced tea doesn't count as water, but we'll talk about that in a minute. All that plays into a little exchange or a lot of exchange. I have a huge motivation or peeve that the client needs to know what normal looks like. The client needs to understand what I'm looking for, why I'm taking her blood pressure, why I'm asking about her diet, why I have them step on the scale. And yes, I have plenty of clients that don't want to see the number. So I just have them step on the scale backwards and I write it down and I never say it out loud. And then my chart's complete in case there's a problem. I can defend myself as a midwife and my license. And I can respect that they're like, I don't want to know. Right. I have had clients refuse to weigh, and then I have to rely on, does the baby feel bigger? Is the fundal height when you measure the belly, is that getting bigger? When I ask about eating habits, do they sound like what I would expect depending on where they are in the pregnancy?
I love that education piece because it does keep the autonomy with the person giving birth. And I may make different choices because now I know why you're asking me about protein, or now I know why you're asking me about bathroom habits and things like that. That makes a huge difference in me owning what I'm doing to grow the baby rather than, well, here's a standard that I'm just getting checked off on with no individualized care, but a standard care of practice and not knowing why that is. Because sometimes when we do question it, we find out that doesn't make sense for me. It might make sense for someone else. It does make sense for me. So I love that that's part of how you work with the clients. I would feel more empowered that way.
To me, it feels like common sense, but I understand now if you put yourself in the medical model, frame of mind, and expectation, education takes way too much time. I learned a long time ago that there was some protocol or an algorithm, now is probably the writer word, that the doctor was only supposed to spend 6 minutes with each pregnant patient, and the bar was low. Is she alive? Is the baby alive? Okay, we're good. You don't have any questions, do you? As they have their hand on the doorknob and they're leaving. The theory was, the defense was that, well, the nurse is going to answer your questions. My skill set is better used elsewhere because I'm the doctor. Well, in the midwifery model of care, as I teach all my students, you're wearing all the hats. You're going to be the person who answers the phone. You're going to be the person who keeps track of the money, who's paid, who isn't. You're going to wear all the business, running a business hats. And that includes being the expert. So put in the OB slot. You're also going to be the first person in the room when it's labor. So now you're going to play the role of the nurse. You may also sometimes play the role as a doula. So the midwife in the midwifery model is holding all those different categories in herself. So I also have to know about nutrition. I can't just say, I'll refer you to the nutritionist, make an appointment. It's all integrated, which is where the bond and the connection and the trust really starts. But back to the 6 minute thing. Most of my prenatal visits are 45 minutes to an hour. I want the client to have plenty of time to tell me, so what's happened since we saw each other last? I want time to say, between now and the next visit, here's what you might expect. And with this, because we're talking about nutrition and diet and calories and scales, I'm very insistent that the client know that 17 to 22 weeks along is the first baby growth spurt, and that there's going to be another one at 33 to 35 weeks. That you haven't lost your mind. No, you are not going to be the size of a house. So if I see somebody at 12 to 13 weeks, because that's usually the first time we can really hear the baby with the Doppler, right? I'm going to see him again then 4 weeks later. So that second visit, I'm going to tell them. And I guess I could say I'm warning them that sometime between 17 and 22 weeks, you're going to eat your normal breakfast. And then 40 minutes later, it's going to be like you never ate in your life. And you're going to have a little discussion with yourself. I can't eat again. I just ate. I ate what I always eat. How could I be this hungry? If I eat again, I'm going to be the size of a house, right? And then what's happening is the baby is demanding because the baby is leaping forward in an astronomical, profound. If you look at the pictures that there are everywhere now, about weeks along, the amount of energy that's going in based on what's being developed in that 17 to 22 weeks is profound. When you look at that piece, it's like, oh, well, no wonder I'm hungry. I'm starving. This will pass. It is a growth spurt. Yes, your fundal height is going to leap forward. The scale, I can always tell when the growth spurt happened because I'll hear a little in the bathroom. And it's like, oh, probably gained 8 pounds since the last visit. And it's only been 4 weeks. All that gets triggered. But I know what's happened is we've had a growth spurt. And then if I saw clients weekly, which sometimes I did at the high volume birth center, you could see sort of this leap in fundal height, the leap in weight, catch up with itself in another 3 or 4 weeks. Now they're right on schedule because there's the old adage that your fundal height should measure about weeks along. About's the operative word because it depends on first time mom, experienced mom, how many babies that uterus has grown in the past. So this is normal. And if they know it going into it, they're going to be like, oh, the reason I'm starving is baby's growing extra brain cells. The baby's figuring out how to make eyelashes. The baby's figuring out how to do this stuff. I should go eat. It makes it more okay. I'm sure the clients that don't know this probably feel crazy. And then it triggers that fear of, I'm going to be the size of a house if I eat like this the rest of the pregnancy. Nobody tells them you're not gonna. Nobody tells them why.
And we aren't really coached or taught, other than our stupid apps that say your baby's a watermelon today, your baby's a can of corn, or whatever it is. We're not taught when is baby putting on weight for what. And so those 2 growth spurts are a really good piece of information to have in your brain about what is normal. And at the end, we call it finishing weight. Can you talk a little bit about that at the end?
Oh, finishing weight is such an innocent sounding sentence, and so much is going on. And I'm glad you asked me that because I wanted to say, since we're talking about growth spurts, let me leap ahead to 33 to 35 weeks because I hear it all the time. Birth stories, classes, doula trainings, other birth workers getting together and telling birth stories. At 33 weeks, most babies are not head down yet. And for those of you who might be new to all of this, head down is the normal birthing position we hope for. We don't want the baby's head up in the ribs. We want the baby's head closer to the door, the exit. Now, at 32 weeks, 33 weeks, if the growth spurt hasn't happened, that demand for extra calories, I'm hungry all the time, the baby doesn't weigh enough yet. The head hasn't gotten big enough to be the heaviest body part, to have gravity work even in this nice water-filled little apartment. At 35 weeks, and I wish somebody would do a paper. How many babies across the country are head up or non-vertex at 32, 33 weeks versus 35 to 36 weeks? And I would say the deciding factor is this growth spurt. The baby's suddenly going to grow. Nothing fits. I have to buy new clothes or not leave the house. That happens at 17 to 22 weeks, big time. Very similar thing can happen at 33 to 35 weeks, right? So, extra calories. The baby knows I'm getting close to my birth date. So I got to finish these synapses that are going to communicate to each other, these nerve endings can't still be here. I got to grow those telomeres. I got to get it so that the impulse doesn't have to leap so far and get dropped, and then the signal's never sent. I have to weigh enough to survive birth. I have to weigh enough to help mom with 50% of the work. Babies that weigh 7 pounds or more do 50% of the labor work. It's actually harder to birth a 6-pound baby because it doesn't weigh as much. It can't help as much. Doesn't have the volume, doesn't have the strength, and it doesn't have the caloric reserve to say, yeah, let me get that cervix opened a little more. Let me get the door open. Okay? Sometimes, if you think about it, think about the birth stories you've heard. The 10-pound babies take longer to get to the door, But then, I don't know. I went into the bathroom and the baby came out. The baby was helping. It's like, okay, we've cleared the way. Let's go. Today's my birthday. I smell birthday cake. The baby also has to have enough body fat. And I know body fat. Ooh, is that a bad word now? Because when the baby's born, breast milk isn't in the breasts yet. It takes about 3 days, give or take. There's some other factors. There's food, it's colostrum, very high calorie, high octane. But the baby has to have enough fat reserve to survive the transition that's happening in the birthing person's body. Day 3 is when the pregnancy hormones drop. What pregnancy? We were never pregnant. And the breastfeeding hormones come up and take over. Which, FYI, which is why day 3 can be a very roller coastery day, because the hormone shift is happening. A lot of people say, well, you've been sleep deprived for 3 days. That's part of it too. And then if you're dieting, don't get me started. You got to have enough calories to heal your body and get into this now, what's now the new normal. No pregnancy hormones, breastfeeding hormones. The breast milk comes in, the baby starts sleeping longer, the baby shows signs of being full and satiated. You start figuring out what full feels like. It's time to feed the baby. All that starts to become predictable. And if you're lucky, you've had a birth worker in your life to help educate you about what to expect, what's normal. These are the timelines. This is what's going on.
And that's the brown fat that babies are born with.
Right. And that goes back to survival of the fittest back in Neanderthal days. Those babies had to have a good layer, because what if nobody could find food? If there's not calories going in, the breast milk is delayed. And if calories don't go in long enough, then there's not milk. Or if what there is isn't enough to sustain a baby. And we have examples in third world countries all the time. Babies survive birth, but when we look at how many babies are still alive at their first birthday, we can look at there's not enough calories. You cannot feed a baby breast milk if all you're eating is green beans, or you're eating once a day, or you're eating every third day. So that goes back to, if you're restricting your calories because you want to get back into your size 2 jeans, please don't do that. You owe it to your baby and your baby's brain to eat enough calories to grow high fat, nourishing breast milk. So the biggest mistake people make is they promptly go into a low fat diet after they birth. And then they don't understand why their baby's awake every hour, every 90 minutes. If you're hungry, guess what? So is your baby. High fat, high protein, salt to taste. It's the same rules as when you were pregnant. Eat your protein, drink your water, eat salt to taste, and then good quality fat. Those are the 4 main components. My clients finally learned to stop calling me, because they're like, the first thing Jenny's going to ask is, how much protein am I eating every day? Am I eating my salt to taste? How much water am I drinking?
So yeah, let's start with that. How much protein are we supposed to be eating a day while we're pregnant?
Interesting question, and I wish there was a short answer, because that has varied. Back when my mom was carrying me, there was no discussion about diet. It was all about, don't gain too much weight. Now get out of here, right? When I became a midwife, Brewer diet was the thing. Tom Brewer had done all this study and research, and he took people in the Southeast. He purposely relocated to where preeclampsia, low birth weight, all the things you don't want to have happen were happening consistently. Fetal death rate, all those things were very high. And he had an idea that it had something to do with what you're eating while you're growing the baby. So he was interviewing lots of locals and found out that fatback was the main source of meat or protein.
What's fatback?
Fatback is the really fatty end part of, like when you look at a package of bacon in the grocery store, it's been cut, centered. In fact, they have more expensive bacon really called the center cut, which is the meatiest part. The ends, where it's mostly fat and might have one little skinny strip of bacon meat, pork, that's fatback. Here, I live in the Southwest. Fatback is sold to make other foods, but it's used to put fat into the recipe and some salty taste. If fat with a little teeny strip of pink meat in it is your meat, guess what? You're not getting any meat in your diet. So it's mostly carbohydrates, fat, salt. But that was sort of startling to him, that this was the affordable, available meat source, which was no meat, it was fat. Okay. So he took these volunteers and housed them in a closed off wing of the hospital. The hospital wasn't using it and turned it into a big hotel. And he started feeding them different levels of protein. And he learned in this first attempt at a very non nutritious, these people were all struggling to maintain their own bodies, let alone grow a baby. And the outcomes showed that, right? His study showed 75 to 100 grams of protein a day fixed all the problems: blood pressure, growth, healthy babies, being able to birth vaginally, getting to your due date, all the things that were on the list. He even tested this because it's like, what if this is a fluke? That 75 grams of protein, his initial study and research was 4 quarts or a gallon of water a day, and then salt at every meal. Okay. When that was imposed, these are the foods that were brought to the people staying at this fancy hotel, everything went into normal. So then he tested it. He stopped feeding them his diet and asked the relatives to constantly bring in whatever you would normally have for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. In less than 2 weeks, everybody who was back on the regular eating at home diet, all the things that were out of balance came right back. Wow. So then he tested it again. It's like, okay, let's go back to 100 grams of protein, gallon of water, salt at every meal. Everything went back into normal range. So that's how the Brewer diet came into being. Now, since then, there was some more research done, and some of it had shifted, that 100 grams was a little excessive. So 65 to 75 was then became the standard sentence. I want you to follow the Brewer diet, that 65 to 75 grams protein, minimum 2 quarts of water. Again, it depends. If it's 100 degrees every day, you might need more water. And then they did salt to taste. Now, salt is a big activating word in the medical model and anybody who's done any research. I'm here to tell you, you got to have salt. Your cells cannot function properly without enough salt. And what happens is, and I'm sorry if this is too complicated, but once you get this picture, you won't be afraid of salt. The cell has a wall. So here's the cell wall, right? So what has to come in? The calories, the food, the blood, all the vitamins, minerals, nutrients goes in. Now it's in the cell. It's doing its job. Because the cell does its job, it makes waste. The waste now cannot get out. It's stuck because there's not enough salt in the body. Here's your buzzword for the day: cellular osmosis. The permeability of the cell wall, things that can come in also have to be able to get out. When there's not enough salt in the body, this becomes a one-way wall. One way. Stuff can come in, but nothing can come out. So now the cell becomes toxic because the waste can't exit. And you start to not feel good. And when the fluid can't exit, You get swollen ankles. You get swollen fingers. You get arthritis. You get stuff that doesn't feel good because the cell can't function the way it's designed to work. As soon as you add salt to the diet, it's shocking. Everybody's joints feel better. Your ankles are less swollen. And yes, these are sweeping statements. So let me justify the salt thing just a little bit more. If it's hot, if you're on your feet all day, gravity is playing a role. If you're not drinking enough water, but you're still eating potato chips, pretzels, salty food, pickles, etc., again, then the salt can make it so that the fluid can't get out. You've got too much protein, too much salt, not enough fluid. So there's no passenger vehicle. The fluid is how things move. There's 4 things that are the pillars or the linchpin of any diet or nutritious venture you care to go on while you're growing a baby: protein, salt, water, fat. I tell my clients all the time because they'll call and say, I'm craving canned spinach with vinegar on it. Yeah. And it's like, okay. And I have to look up spinach. It's like, what is the body asking for? It was asking for acids, vinegar, right? Give into that. But I noticed my clients teach me so much that if we make sure that the protein's being met, fluids, salt, fats, the cravings go away because we're feeding the body what it needs, right? That's the sentence I give them all the time. As long as you eat for the baby first, I don't care if you want chocolate cake with bean dip and pickle sauce. I don't care. You're going to be fine. That leads into very typical in the 3rd trimester, cravings in the afternoon for sugar. And usually it isn't the client that shares that with me. It's their partner while the client is in the bathroom peeing on a stick and getting on the scale. It's like, oh, this pregnancy's great. She bakes every day. When I come home from work, there's cookies, there's coffee cake, and they get caught. You didn't tell her that I make cookies every day. And it's like, but that's a valuable piece of information for me as the midwife. If at 2 or 3 o'clock, fixing a sugary dessert thing seems like the most brilliant idea ever, and you go and do it, that tells me you're not eating enough protein. The body has given up on getting protein. So it says, okay, if I can't have the big logs of fuel, give me the stuff that makes me feel good right away. And if you're building a fire, that's the tinder. That's the little stuff that burns up. If you watch Survivor, they keep poking the stuff in. That's sugar in your body's system. It's given up. You're not going to give me the logs. You're not going to give me the middle-sized wood, the carbohydrates. Then give me the sugar so I can feel good right now. And I can continue doing what I need to do as a system. So as soon as we bump up their protein intake, and it's as little as 10 grams, some clients need 15. Surprisingly, those afternoon sugar cravings go away. And I didn't buy it initially because I grew up in a house that brownies were good any time of the day, every day.
That was my household too. I still believe that.
Brownies fix a lot of things.
They do.
As do donuts. But I noticed that when I paid attention to my protein intake, and if I eat 65 grams of protein a day, I don't even care about bread anymore, which is almost sacrilegious. I can walk away from bread. I can walk away from sugar. So like Tom Brewer, I was testing this on myself. And it was like, wow, if you eat enough protein, those cravings go away. Now, that doesn't mean those of you who are trying to get back into your size 2 jeans after you have a baby to just protein load. Because again, you need to make balanced breast milk. And part of that balanced process is fat. Greek yogurt, that specific recipe has more protein per serving than any other yogurt on that huge wall in your grocery store. I would encourage you to eat Greek yogurt, put it in your smoothies, use it as sour cream, whatever. And then do the same thing when you're breastfeeding. One of the tricks my clients taught me is those smoothies. Just make a whole blender pitcher and put it in the refrigerator. Because I understand eating with a new baby can become a problem. I don't know why I'm crying. It's like, when's the last time you ate? So, all of this is to say, please eat like you're growing a baby right up to when you're pushing the baby out. Please eat like you're feeding a baby. And if I have to say that again, I will. It takes more calories to make breast milk. And you want your breast milk, sorry, still do the protein, do the fat, do the salt. If you're still craving chocolate cake, have it because you ate your required foods first. Something else is going on, and it's okay. Odds are, though, you won't crave as many weird things when you do your 4 pillars. Stopping eating, I've heard doctors say it. Well, you could go into labor any day now. And I've watched women give up on their calorie intake, eating regular food. They start eating more junk food because it's like, well, I can have a baby any day. I don't have to worry anymore. And yet they're still pregnant 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 5 weeks.
Yeah, don't go into labor depleted and postpartum depleted.
Exactly.
So important. That nutrition is so important.
And somebody did a study, I don't know how many years ago, about almost IVing iron immediate postpartum. And they were trying to figure out if that would prevent like delayed postpartum hemorrhage or speed up healing. And what was underneath that was people who quit eating towards the end like they were still pregnant. One of the benefits of your 4 pillars and eating your protein is that you're less likely to be anemic. And anemia has lots of side effects. One of them is tired, weepy, but it also makes it so that your uterus doesn't care about working, increases the risk of bleeding, and nobody needs to start parenthood in a hole. Please eat like you are pregnant until you push the baby out.
Tell me a little bit about vegans or vegetarians because they've got to make shift their whole proteins because they're not eating meat and eggs and all that kind of stuff. So what do you do when you have a vegan or vegetarian in your practice?
Good point, because often they start at a lower weight. They're already behind, so to speak. And then when you add growing a baby, the body's like, wait, we got to decide what the priority is. We can't support both. So, one of the big things I do with them is where are you getting your protein? I let them educate me. What are you using for protein? All my clients have to keep a diet sheet. I want them to understand because I hear it all the time. Oh, I eat plenty of protein. When I make them keep track, it's usually 30 or 40 grams, which when you're not growing a baby is bare minimum. That'll do. When you're growing a baby, you need 65 to 75, and sometimes your body will tell us you need more. Most vegans, vegetarians, the body is screaming for more protein while it's growing a baby. So they sometimes need 75, 85, 90. Again, with visits and checking blood pressure, urine samples, other pieces of information, we find what they need. And they may need more calories per day because they don't have a fat layer most of the time. And that fat layer, as we've established, is critical for the last trimester, labor and birth, and immediate postpartum. You're not doing a favor to anyone if you don't have that fat layer down. So, figuring out ways to up their protein in foods they'll eat. And sometimes it's combining beans and rice. And sometimes they'll do cheese, sometimes they won't. Sometimes they'll do fish, sometimes they won't. So, it often falls to them to show me what are you willing to eat and where are you going to get your grams of protein. And the body will tell. If they're not doing it, their other components fall out of the range of normal. And then I ask them, are you eating your protein? Oh, I got so sick of, it's like, well, your body's asking for you to go back to it.
And I appreciate that you really educate them on nutrition, because that is one thing that's lacking in the medical model. My families, when they're talking to me about it, the doctor hasn't talked to them about it. They're the ones going, I don't know, my diet, this and that, because all they're saying is, yeah, just keep up on your protein. They're not getting direct information on why and what, and those pieces of urine and weight gain and all of that, blood pressure, putting together for nutritional balance. So I appreciate that that's how you're figuring it out per person, which is the individualized care instead of the standard care. Slap a label on it, move on, because that's not always what's best for the mom and the baby.
And it could be a simple answer in the medical model for the client to be aware enough to say, can I get an appointment with a nutritionist? I just don't feel good all the time. I'm not sleeping well. See, when they're not sleeping well, that's the only precursor we get for a tendency towards preeclampsia. And that can often be fixed or mitigated or kept in the normal range by increasing the protein and the fluids. And a quick note on the salt thing. It was my understanding back when I was doing all the brewer diet research and watching my clients respond or not, that often the diet sheet that's handed to a pregnant person in the medical model is a diet designed for cardiac patients, which is really where the no salt thing comes from. Because if you pay attention, people in third trimester, if they go on a no salt diet, guess what? Their swelling gets worse. Cellular osmosis can't occur. So they're applying a pump function, a pump that's having trouble working, to pregnancy. One has nothing to do with the other.
And why are they getting a cardiac diet?
It's already made up and it's easy.
Wow.
The other piece of information, which I hope somebody emails us and says you're wrong, my understanding is that dietary education during pregnancy is the shortest class. It's not a priority. And yet, with the new information we have now about microbiome and our gut and where our brain cells are and how everything talks to everything, needs to be a bigger class in medical school. Nutrition, what you're eating, sugar, not sugar. Okay. I know there are places where there's food deserts. I live in New Mexico. We have pregnancy care deserts, but we also have places where the gas station is the grocery store. So again, same approach. If this is where you can get, tell me what's on the shelves. Where is the best protein that you have access to? And let's design a diet plan around that. Or a nutrition, I hate the word diet, the nutrition plan. What can you eat for breakfast? And I remember I used to have a video of Tom Brewer, and he would put an egg on top of a vitamin bottle. And he said you should eat at least one egg. And there's been a recent study now that it's 2 eggs every day, like a vitamin pill. It's never going to hurt you to eat eggs, which I know goes against all the medical model diet about cholesterol. And I laugh when I drive by and it's like, oh, yeah, we have egg white sandwiches. Well, the yolk is where the iron, B complex, the isolates, all the things that make it so that your body can take the calories and the nutrition from the food that's going by. Please, please, please eat the yolk.
So, as we're wrapping up, I would tell my families, don't skimp on the food and nutrition. And if you get kicked out of the birth center because of lack of scientific education on how much weight you should be gaining, then so be it. Because you're taking care of your body, you're not going into postpartum recovery depleted. Skip the birth center then if you get kicked out. But don't starve your baby, don't starve yourself, and don't freak out over those last couple of weeks of pregnancy. That's just going to raise your cortisol and stress out your baby and stress you out before labor happens. And it's going to hold you back from having a kind of a birth experience you want. So what are your last bits of information that you would want advice going to these families?
Low blood sugar serves no one at any time, but particularly while you're growing a baby and figuring out your new normal, immediate and not so immediate postpartum. I know when I trained as a midwife, the short answer was we would expect our clients to gain about a pound a week. Well, that's 40 pounds. What a radical concept. A pound a week. And yet, that's typically, when I look at beginning weight and ending weight, it's always above 25 pounds. The vegans and the vegetarians gain more than 40 pounds. Sometimes they gain 65 to 70, but that's because they were a walking stick when they came in my office. They had to lay down the fat. And they lose it afterwards because breastfeeding is demanding. And I'm sorry, one more thing, the menopause thing. I casually mentioned that if the body has to rob from itself to continue growing the baby, the next time you're walking out in public and you see an older woman who can't lift her head, she's walking, she's fine, but she can't lift her head. There's somebody I can guarantee that had several babies close together, no nutritional information, because her bone marrow rose to the occasion. So now her bone integrity, her skeletal integrity is less than. Please eat so that you can stand up straight when you're older. And I know when you're young, you're never going to get old, but I want you to hear my voice when you're thinking, oh, I shouldn't eat. Yes, you should, because your future self will thank your present self.
And there's a difference in eating chips and cookies and crap than eating some good healthy yogurt and some berries because you're hungry, right? With some pumpkin seeds with it.
And then if you want a brownie or a chocolate chip cookie because you had your protein and your fat and your salt, do it.
Life's too short. You should always have a brownie.
There's a part of you that's going to be like, okay, I'll have a cookie later. Sentence that I thought would never exit my internal dialogue because I'm full. You might be shocked at how much better you feel. And the other tip that I learned from the partners is walking up and down every aisle of the grocery store. Because now when you're looking for easier or faster protein, because maybe you already have 3 kids, things that are doable, what's going to work at your house. It's one thing for me to give you all kinds of recipes and ideas, but it's got to work at your house. And I hear it all the time. Who knew that there were these protein shakes in these little single serving but it's not in the refrigerator section. Look around. Take time, hire a babysitter, go to the grocery store and nose around places that you haven't been to see what's going to work while you're growing a baby, continuing to work your job, take care of the kids you already have, take care of grandma, whatever you're doing. Get the stuff that's going to work at your house, but still meets protein, water, salt, fat.
Great advice. All right. Hope you learned something today, and we will see you next week. Thanks for joining us today. And remember, it's your body, your choice, and finding your voice is your power. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow us in all the places, and go to birtheducationcenter.com for our blog and more online education classes. And we'll see you next week.